Welcome to week 5 of Communicating in a Crisis and Beyond. This week we're going to be talking about managing consistent branding experience online. If anyone has been watching all the way through, then they know that the first week was around how to change your messaging so that you aren't trying to sell too much at this time. People feel a little bit uncomfortable with that. So the main message from us was move from really promotional messages to more of a brand building messages, and we've talked through a bit of how you might do that, but really this week gives us an opportunity to think about how your brand is turning up, particularly online, because that's where we all are now. You may before have had the opportunity to communicate obviously in person, but the channels that you have available to you are very much online, which is why it's so much more important to make sure that where you're turning up is consistent. We also have a special treat for you this week with our guest, who I'll introduce in a moment. Please do make sure that you filled in the poll. The structure, this is the structure that we're going to go through. We're going to talk about what a brand is, why it's important, ways to ensure brand consistency, any examples, and then we're going to talk about Canva, which is a really brilliant tool to make sure that you are consistent with your brand. We'll then move on to a Q&A, which won't be posted on YouTube. It's for 2 reasons. Number one, I think it's important that you can have some privacy and feel comfortable in asking questions that aren't going to end up being on the internet forever. And number two, I think you should only benefit from Q&A if you turn up to the live session, but that's just me. Any resources will be emailed out afterwards. That's one of the benefits of registering for this live, because if there are any links that we talk about, you'll get those as well. And if you are interested in the rest of the series, this is the URL to go and find out. There's a list of the upcoming ones that we have booked in, and to register for future ones. So welcome Marie-Louise O'Neill. She runs Lovely Evolution, and I thought of her asking her to come along today because she is the Canva Queen. A lot of the messaging that I've heard from Marie-Louise has been about how to, there's a lot of rebranding projects that you do, isn't it? Isn't there, Marie-Louise?
That's right, yes, yeah.
And then you also run Canva workshops and stuff like that. So thank you.
Paul's trying to get me to go with hashtag Canva Girl.
Yeah. Okay, the Canva Girl on. Canva.
But I have heard other people call me the Canva Queen, so.
Well, it's alliteration, isn't it? So yeah, so I mean, she was just a natural fit really to talk about this and to support. And because I'm not a brand expert, it's very much a part of what we do. I run the Ideal Marketing Company, so we do a full range of things, but I'm definitely not the brand specialist, although it's an important thing, part of what we do. She's also kindly given me some of the resources that she talks about in her workshops. Obviously not tried to use too many of them, because that's a valuable thing to do in and of itself. So I'll also give you an opportunity, Marie-Louise, to talk about ways that you work with your clients.
Thank you.
So moving on to the first thing, what is a brand? And what I'm going to do is to share the poll results. End polling and share results. The 75% of you think the logo is the first thing to think about. It's the first thing they think about when they hear the word brand, which is not a surprise at all. 25% think of fonts, 38% think of colours, 63% think of messaging, tone of voice, 38% think of imagery, and 63% think of values. So that actually, aside from the logo, that's quite interesting for me, because messaging and tone of voice, that's the majority of people, or after logo, that's what people think of, and values. So that's really great to hear. What do you think of those results? Is that what you'd expect, Marie-Louise?
Yeah, so I guess if people are thinking that they could only click of one, then the first thing certainly people do think of is the logo. It's the first thing as part of the physical outcome of a branding exercise, but it is so much more. So I filled out the poll, and I put everything because it is. Yeah. Spoiler alert.
I suppose so I've taken some definitions, because I think when I first thought about brand, I did think it was logo, and it is not as simple as that. So David, and these unfortunately, these definitions actually make things a bit more confusing, because David Ogilvy, if you don't know who he is, father of advertising, defined brand as an intangible sum of a product's attributes. I wouldn't just say it's a product, it could be a company or a service. The product is quite limited. And then there's also, a brand is not a logo, a brand is not an identity, a brand is not, just all the things that it's not, which is really helpful. But a brand is a person's gut feeling about a product, service or organisation. What we end up talking about a lot of the time with a brand is supporting elements, because there are every place that you might be in touch with your customers, there's an experience that builds to a schema and an idea of who they think of when they think of you. And the things like logos, messaging, your colours and your fonts are all the things that support that and help to connect those things together.
Absolutely.
So that's the reason why the designer is the person to provide these supporting elements of what a brand is, because it's actually a very intangible feeling.
Yeah, and there's a lot of work that if you want to get your brand right, there's a lot of psychological stuff that you can do in the background, and certainly some of the things that you touch upon about, talk about is defining your target market and things like that, and that is all completely linked to creating your brand, because you need to know who you want your brand to appeal to. So it's not just oh, I like this font or that colour, and create something that looks pretty. It's, if you want it to perform better or at its best, you do need to kind of go on a deeper level. And that's where sort of looking and really understanding what a brand truly is, and realising that it's, what your values are, what's the tone of voice, all of these things tie in together. And if you've got one or two of these things that are not quite working, it's going to be slightly off. You're going to maybe still have reasonable results, but if you can get all of these things working, you're going to have that kind of sweet spot there, and really sort of hitting all those
more
points.
Powerful, isn't it? I think I also know that your presentation around having a consistent brand, you talk about personas, and know that we're a big supporter of starting there and making sure that your brand supports talking to the people who you want to speak to. So I think it was the second one in our series talks about identifying who your personas and knowing who they are, and that should be a driving force behind your brand, shouldn't it, and making sure it connects with.
Absolutely, yeah. And I like that you run some workshops and stuff about it, because for those that don't really know where to start, having that kind of help is useful to sort of dig that bit deeper, because there's plenty of resources online which because they can be called like avatars, target market, ideal client, there's lots of different names, and you can be quite surface level as to sort of maybe age bracket, male, female, other, and other things going on, but you can go down to the nitty gritty of kind of giving them a name, where do they shop, what supermarket, maybe even what toilet roll they buy, if it's relevant to your branding. So you can kind of go to a real depth with it. And it does help. It comes back to sort of how you're communicating online. If you know exactly what your brand represents, who you're communicating to, again, it's all aligning.
Yeah, I think this is the reason why we do personas is because a lot of your briefing for any design work is naturally kind of already done. So you have a resource that's very helpful the minute that you're thinking about a website design, or you're thinking about your social media, your messaging comes out of it. So that's why it's really helpful. So the reason why a brand is important, I think we've already touched on it a bit. It's important at any time because it creates a positive feeling. But the reason why it's particularly important at this time is because we are moved online mostly, because it's an emotionally fraught time. So if anyone's watching this in the future, by the way, we're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. Hello, future. So particularly at this time, emotions are running high. The way that you interact online is going to be remembered, and it's an opportunity to really build relationships. But also, you really don't want to be selling too hard. It's a brand building opportunity. So
I think you could argue that you don't really want to be selling too hard ever.
At any time, yeah.
So there are some sort of principles in that actually it's maybe giving some people some really great lessons in how to market and go do sales the right way, because it's coming back to that relationship building, that trust that you mentioned.
Yeah, I think social media supports that, because if you look at the algorithm, particularly the algorithm changes in Facebook and Instagram, they will penalise increasingly heavily anyone that's trying to sell. So in order for you to get organic reach, it has to be brand building experiences, messaging. The problem for a lot of business owners, particularly if they're looking at their analytics, is that then they see that social media is not leading to a website traffic that then leads to a conversion. But then there's this element that's kind of hidden by the stats, which is the positive impact it's had on brand building and on the brand. So I think it's just knowing that there's an element of your marketing activities that are brand building. You are not going to be able to monitor them, but they are probably responsible for an improved conversion rates when it comes to it. Pre-qualified people who are ready to buy from you because they trust you. So the reason why a brand is quite important is that humans make emotional decisions before they make rational ones. If you know much about how the brain is structured, you've got your kind of chimp brain. This is a brain. You've got your inner chimp brain, which developed first, and that's all very much about emotions and fear, and it's close to the brain.
Talking about that book, is it The Chimp Paradox?
The chimp, yeah, exactly.
Yes.
But so a lot of the time we spend most of our time trying to control what the chimp is doing, because the chimp wants to eat sugary things and be lazy and do all these things, and then your prefrontal cortex,
usually a bit of a jerk as well. The chimp is responsible for all the things that you regret normally. But the prefrontal cortex was the last thing to develop, and this is your rational stuff up front, and it takes a lot of energy for your rational or logical mind to make a decision and override your chimp brain, which is close. I think something that kind of sums that up quite well, that I think if you haven't read The Chimp Paradox, is thinking about the terms that we use, like a gut feeling. A lot of people make or check in with a decision making by going, how does it feel in your gut, and it's true, there is a sort of intuition there. I won't go fully like woo-woo about it, but it is to trust that, and understand that people that you're communicating to also trust that, whether they realize it or not. If that decision feels right in their heart and their gut, that they'll use their brain to back it up. So they'll be like, okay, that feels right.
Yeah.
And then it's backed up by this much experience and this price and stuff like that.
I think normally
you're drawing them in with that emotion, whether it's a pain point or a positive.
I think normally a lot of the time we think that we're making decisions for a rational reason, but I forgot what the wording is, but it's kind of like you kind of rationalize it afterwards, but the reality is probably quite emotional. So your brand is the place where you can create those emotional, that would support an emotional decision and will help with a buying decision. The brand helps for you to build know, like and trust, which you'll hear salespeople talk about, because those are the three things that people really need in order to buy from you. They want to know you, they want to like you, and they want to trust you. So at this time, your brand will enable you to build that, so that when people do start to move and to buy and to, they're going to be some difficult buying decisions, and people are going to be probably fighting more for that share of the money that is available for a while. So that positive brand experience will be more important than ever. Like I said, the stats, unfortunately, you won't be able to measure how well your brand is doing, but what you will probably find is that you get pre-qualified leads and a higher conversion rate. Do you often hear people saying, there are often experiences where somebody does something, you're like, oh, that's very on brand for that person to go and do that, or for that company?
Yeah, and even in where I network, there's a lot of smaller businesses, particularly sort of single owner managed businesses, where they are literally the brand. So you particularly see it there. There's no coincidence that sort of the colours that they have in their branding is colours that they like. It usually happens to be that way, you know, from a subliminal point of view, they've chosen that. And so they're often kind of, you know, maybe buying stuff like stationery accessories. They might, if they're a woman, they might paint their nails in a certain colour that's branding, and it's a talking point. You know, sometimes it's something that is subliminal, and sometimes it's sort of, oh look, I've got my nails done in my brand colours. I'm so on brand.
I think Laura Ann Williams is a great example of kind of living your brand, because she's got these brilliant spectacles, and then the graphics that she has on social media is very much, it's showing her
exactly
as a cartoon character. So yeah, that's, I see what you mean about, you don't need to be a company with a big logo and fonts and stuff, but it can be the way that you do your hair and how those show up consistently across all platforms.
I mean, it does all link, because, you know, if you're going on an online networking, or whether, you know, in person, when we start going back to that, anytime it's back to the touch point. So, you know, any of your sales or marketing or members of your organization, or you and yourself, you're representing that brand. So, and the way you do your hair, the you know, your clothes, that all, your manner and speaking, again, that all links in with that building that trust.
Yeah, and I think that's the reason why I talked about, you know, you've got your logo and your fonts and your colours and their supporting elements, but there are other ways, like the way you pick up your phone, the way that someone's welcomed into your office, and that becomes a little bit more difficult the larger an organisation becomes, but it's still very important. So I thought it'd be worth highlighting the ways to ensure brand consistency. Brand guidelines are a big one, but these can be, 30 pages long or 2, can't they? What do you generally find, Marie-Louise?
So in my corporate days, I've worked with some big names and worked with their brand guidelines, and they are literally like a massive binder with a lot of fuffle, and the kind of very specific to the millimeters examples of templates for things, so they can be quite comprehensive. Often they're quite a waste of paper, waste of space, in the sense of
uses them, then
yeah, I mean, they can be helpful. It's good to have it there, I suppose, in theory, that if someone, you know, is working on creating something for that business and it's not on guidelines and it's there in writing, you could be like, well, that's not on brand. But I myself, I create one page, I guess there's sort of, I call them brand guidelines or logo guidelines, or a logo overview. And it's really sort of as part of the logo project, which shows the logo itself in the different versions, because I like to create, where possible, like a square version, a more landscape version, because, you know, something that you might put on your Facebook business page as the profile picture is, you're going to want that more square, whereas on your website at the top you'd probably want something more landscape.
I think I have included as well an example of what you from the slides that you sent over. I think there's going to be an example of a layout that you put together with the next slide. So I think one of the questions will be, what do you think is a bare minimum? So we'll hopefully be able to touch on that.
Yeah, so in mine, which you'll see, it's what I include, so you'll be able to see that. But yeah, I mean, and you can create your own brand guidelines. You know, you can use all sorts of tools, not just Canva, that I'll talk about later, but even just like creating a PowerPoint slide for yourself and put all these elements together so that you yourself are clear, and it's part of that process of knowing kind of what sort of image styles you might use. You could include snippets of any, you know, what your Facebook page looks like, maybe your business card, so that you can show the you know, where your logo is applied and how it looks, so you can see at a glance, you know, what your website looks like. You can sort of have that as your own brand guidelines, to sort of keep it, you know, as an audit for yourself, as well as sort of making sure, is anything kind of not fitting, because it's often you create something, or if you're working with different design agencies or designers, you know,
You need to be able to send it over. It's something that's quite important for, I think people maybe think of doing it once you've got employees, but as you quite rightly say, you may be as one individual filling all the roles, but also a lot of the marketing materials people develop are kind of over time, and they seem to like have different versions of their logos as each thing develops.
So there's a term that I really like, and I sometimes call myself that on behalf of my own clients, and that's being a brand guardian. And you can be your own brand guardian, and if you particularly, you know, you can start doing that from the point of being, you know, setting up your business, if it's just a person of one in your business, because as you scale your business, you need to have them on board with your brand vision. And if you've got a document, whether it's a sort of single page sort of basic overview or a multi-page thing where you can say, look, you can just hand that over and go, okay, this is what we stand for, this is how we show up on social media, this is what our website looks like. And if it, particularly if they're supporting you with marketing or, you know, whatever their role is, they've got that clear idea, and they can help you evolve that over time, because it could be a living working document in a way, like you have a business plan. I mean, often we'll do a business plan for, you know, because we're told to, or, you know, if you're applying for funding or whatever, and then you sort of file it away and ignore it. But actually, sort of every sort of once a year or every quarter, depending on how your business runs, you'd be picking that up and looking at that. And so you can do the same with your brand guidelines that you create. You know, you can, anytime you do want to create a new direction, a new service, maybe in January when everyone's like, oh, new year, new me, do it with your branding, and, you know, have a bit of a review.
And I think at the moment people are maybe facing pivoting their companies as well. I know that one of the people on the call has gone through a massive rebrand recently, and it was because they paid attention to their business with the business community, Paul Green, paid attention to actually the value that people did get from it, and as a result of that changed the whole logo and the messaging behind it, and that was a recognition of who he served and you know, and how he could communicate with them.
And he's got some brand guidelines as well, because I've seen them.
Yeah, exactly. So a very good example. I think so. Just some quick points about anything that you can do. You can provide training for staff if you've got some. The point that I made about how to pick up the phone, you know, and how to respond emails. There's so many different ways that you have touch points. So that can be quite important. I was speaking with a copywriter earlier this week, and I think it's quite interesting sometimes how you might meet a person in person eventually one day, and then when you see an email, they might actually seem quite terse, and you might think that you've annoyed them, because just their written communication doesn't necessarily
yeah, I know that I tend to naturally become a lot more formal when I'm writing emails, particularly the first email, like if I'm presenting designs or reaching out to someone, I'm like, dear sir, not quite as bad as that, but it is. I am definitely
salutations.
Yes, tally ho, and all of that. But you know, I'm learning to sort of build my own sort of messaging and tone of voice to try and show how I talk in person, how I show up in person is how I show up online, or, you know, in a blog and stuff like that. So it can be a bit of a journey, but it's something that it's worth developing.
And I think you're quite right. It's an ongoing evolution, especially with online channels. There's going to be more and more being added. So, for example, Zoom background is a thing that all of a sudden was very, very important for everybody in the world. Exactly.
Paul's got his.
So those are really important things. And you know, for me, the role of the planner has been, because there's too much space behind me to have a background too close. But so that's part of the reason why it needs to be ever changing, is because new channels are popping up all the time. Social media is obviously increasingly important, but every time there's an update on LinkedIn about how big the photos, like the profile changes are on Facebook are changing their image sizes in mobile view, for example. That's going to be important. So also make resources available for those who are approved to use it. Your point, Marie-Louise, about having the PowerPoint slides, so that if you do want a designer, you're going to outsource something, so that they've got that ready to use. It's one of the main questions that we ask if we do design work, is what have you got for us to understand? Because honestly, it's going to take more time otherwise if those brand guidelines aren't there, the project will take longer and more of your time is going to be taken up trying to figure out exactly how to represent you in the design, and it's going to be more backwards and forwards.
Yeah, and it also means that sort of you might miss something that may be relevant that's been done, that's maybe not on an online presence that you can just access. So obviously, if you were doing something new, you'd be able to, the first thing you would do is sort of look at what's already out there online. So social media platforms, website certainly, but you know, there may have been sort of something, okay, a brochure, printed brochure that was created 5 years ago it's maybe a little bit out of date, but there's certain aspects that you want to make sure is still included in, you know, or you know, I do see it quite a lot where, like I said before, that someone goes to one designer or then to a printer and uses their in-house, and then if you lay all these bits out, they all look a bit different. You know, maybe sort of one person's gone, oh, I'll just use this font, because they don't know what the kind of the core fonts are. So if, you know, what do you do? And if you haven't fully briefed that person to create that design work for you, well, you know, that if you've got that tool, it just makes it so much better, and you're going to get a better result because of that.
Yeah, and I mean, realistically, the reason why we want consistency is it just makes that brand schema so much more powerful. Otherwise, if you've got lots of inconsistency, then you're having a more diluted brand experience, and the feelings around your brand are probably a bit more confusing. Particularly if somebody has an experience that is in conflict with everything else they have had with your brand, that can be very kind of disjointing for somebody.
Yeah, so, and even if someone's not a design expert, if you go onto someone's website and it's looking out of date and you can see that, I mean, I know myself that my website is like, I've had some new photos done and I've used them everywhere on my social media, but if you go on my website, it's still got my old photo, and I'm aware of that, and it's something that I'm working on. But if you have everything looking consistent, there's just sort of it's back to that subliminal level, whether you realize it or spot it or not, as a potential client, it's sort of your brain likes it.
Yeah.
Your brain doesn't like change, so you will pick up those nuances.
Looking for patterns, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what, yeah, absolutely. I think there's times where I've met someone in networking where they've been extremely competent and an expert and an authority, and then their website doesn't really support that. No, I can obviously forgive it, but it's just an experience that subliminally I'm going to be having about my experience with them. So if you want to go and have a look at what's going on for your brand, complete a brand audit, what are all your touch points? And this does include, obviously, the social media and website and email marketing, your signature, but also your phone conversations, any place where you are in touch with your customers, list them down and then go through to analyze how consistent it is. Does anything need updating? Are there ways that you can establish more of a brand experience? Because it may be that you maybe don't have much in your email signature, or you don't actually feel that the values of your company are really speaking through what you have got on your website. Whether that's the tone of voice is different on the website because somebody else has written it versus the way that you are on social media. Is that consistent? So think about those different elements.
I think with that there can be a little bit of a shift there.
But it's context specific, isn't it?
Yeah, so for example, the way you might present yourself on LinkedIn versus Facebook might be slightly different. So it's not necessarily about being a completely different person or business, but it is you might make certain adjustments like you would in different settings for like business meetings. You might sort of show up slightly different because it's appropriate to that.
I think it's also knowing how far you're from an awareness, from a place of awareness, deciding how far you're going to stretch. Because if there's a completely different person who's doing your social and they are speaking really with their own voice, and a different copywriter who's written all of your website copy, have a look at that. And if you've decided that's the kind of stretch that you're happy to make, then that's fine. So here we've got an example of what a design pack might look like. Would these be brand guidelines?
This is more of the, I would call it more of a logo overview. So it's just, it's sort of the beginnings of the brand guidelines. I wouldn't say it's a full brand guidelines because it doesn't take into consideration the sort of imagery style that you might use. It doesn't show examples of the other things that have been created for it. It's just literally focusing on the logo portion of the brand. So the fonts I've included there. So I like to include links to where I got the fonts, which is great. I show the colours and the different kind of colour breakdowns, so for print use and for screen. So something called hexachrome is one with the hashtag. That's particularly great for, you know, making sure that it's back to that consistency. Because if you were to give that to your new web designer, for example, a web developer, they can make sure that the colours used are exactly that, rather than trying to guess like a red that might kind of work, or trying to colour pick it and it's not being quite right. You've got it defined, so you know that to your best of your ability, you're making it consistency. You can give an example of the different sort of types of the logos, of the square format and the more landscape.
I think you'll also find that you're it's not just consistent, but any other design work is probably going to be cheaper and easier, because they don't have to spend time on this discovery, trying to get to the bottom of what the right colours and stuff are. You've given them the guidelines, they can just get on with it. So that's another thing from a website point of view, from our perspective. So imagery you talked about a little bit there, and I know that it can be something like almost a time sink. If someone doesn't have imagery for us, we find that actually we have to allow time to find good supporting imagery. Is this something that's a challenge that you often find to be a challenge, to get the right kind of imagery to pack together?
So I guess sort of to reference Canva, but one thing that's useful about that is that you've got you can upload your own imagery. So if you have a built growing image library of stuff that you've maybe taken yourself or have sourced from other image libraries, you can upload it there, and so you're kind of creating a style. You could also create yourself a sort of image example, so you could have just a montage of images, the sort of things that you either have used or would like to use that's relevant. So for example, for this brand, she supports, she's a coach who supports people who have given up drinking, that they want to be sober, that's their choice, and how to stay sober. So she's not AA or replacing AA, she's the support after. So she could be showing you know, with the imagery that she'd be showing, it could be sort of more black and white images because of a colour theme with like pops of red maybe there. It could be showing, it's really thinking about what's she trying to communicate and relating to you know, how she helps people. So that could be the types of images of people she works with or wants to work with. So she's got a very specific target market. And you know, sort of obviously images of like maybe alcohol, binging, the hangovers. So there's all sorts of things that you could go away and source, and you could either have a smorgasbord of these images on one page, or you could be specific to one slide in your PowerPoint is showing examples of drinking related ones, one, you know, for the target market, stuff like that. So you can go quite specific, and it makes massive help, because there are ways that if you've used a stock photography that you can search for it online and make sure that we can you know, as a sort of a designer marketing agency, we can find them. There are ways on Google that we can hunt them down.
Find the right one. So actually I don't want to spend too much time on this, because I want to get to Canva, and we're kind of, I think we've spent quite a bit of time, which is good, which is valuable on the brand. But I think this is a great example of where the colours are exactly the same in some of the imagery, but the fonts are terrible fonts.
Yeah, I'm a complete font geek, and you know, a lot of my time in the branding process, both in creating the logo and then creating templates and designs afterwards, is making sure that the fonts that you use work well, not only with the logo or as part of the logo.
Yeah, I think with documents that you send out as well, that can be kind of a problem making sure that that's usable for everybody in the company.
Yeah, that's where you would have like a sort of secondary font level. So you know, if the preferred font that's maybe a more specialist font isn't available, then you know you have something that is a more like a system font.
Yeah, you either we have one for if we're PDFing something, and then if we're going to need to share the Word document, there's another one that we move to instead. So let's talk about Canva, because it is such a brilliant tool to support everything that we've been talking about. There are free versions and there are paid versions. We're hopefully going to be able to distinguish a little bit between the two. So is there anything that you want to say about Canva before we go into what I've included? The information about templates and how you can put colours in there, but why is it that you love Canva, Marie-Louise?
So Canva to me is just a tool. I mean, it's not the only tool that I use as a design professional. There are other programs that I use, so Canva by no means is replacing that for me. However, I am finding that even in my day-to-day kind of business, I am using Canva a lot more, particularly for sort of social media. I'm kind of building up really nice template resource for myself, for my own business, as well as doing the same for some clients. But the thing with Canva is that it's really useful for non-designers. If you haven't got a clue, because of all the resources in it, it makes it pretty easy to use. You know, obviously, like anything, you need to sort of learn your way around it, but you know, it's not impossible to do. It just takes maybe a little bit of time, a bit of help, but it's very accessible, I feel.
And they have some good guidelines in there as well, I think. So I think one of the greatest things about Canva, and these are slides, you can probably tell from the top, the colours are a bit different. These are Marie-Louise's slides from a different presentation on brand consistency. You know, you have good launch pads with these templates where, say, you want to develop a logo. Hopefully you're going to a designer to get a logo done. But yeah, if you are looking for a Facebook post or whatever, they will give you some ideas to start with.
It's that, exactly that, is the starting point. So and it comes back to if you pick a template from Canva, or if you're using another system, you know, that has templates available, the first things you need to be doing is making sure you're replacing it with your logo, if there's a logo in it. You're replacing the colours with your brand colours, and you're replacing the fonts with the fonts that you know, your brand fonts. And that's the sort of bare minimum. You know, you might want to do other tweaks as well, as like what the content of it is, but make sure that you don't just leave what the fonts are in there. They may look very nice, but and they can give you inspiration, but if you've got an established brand, you need to be making sure that you are going back to your logo guidelines or your brand guidelines and being consistent with that.
I think that's a really 101. I think it's a really good point, because otherwise, and we've had this a few times where, you know, if you're talking to a client, it's like, well, this is what I like. And it's like, well, it's not really about you so much as it is about the people who you serve. So particularly when you have larger companies where maybe like different designs are put in front of them, where it's not just about how much you like a design so much as whether it represents your company and is consistent. So it's a really good point to make. There's loads of stuff I've got up on my wall, postcards where I've gone and found things on Canva, and then I've just made my own kind of postcard to print off, because they're just quite a nice inspirational thing. But yeah, none of them would represent the ideal marketing company. So this is a suite of templates. Is this what you've developed for a client, Marie-Louise?
Yeah, so this is something that I've sort of created from scratch. So I did the logo for Ignite, and then I thought it was really useful to use Canva as a tool, that because there's multiple people on the kind of the marketing team, as it were. So it means that if anything were to happen to me or I'm not available, one of the other members could, you know, use these as a tool, both now and in the future, because these are sort of semi-regular events. so it was, for me, it was about making something that was bigger than me. You know,
Right.
you know, obviously, I mean, I'm still involved with it. I'm still doing stuff. But it's just a really great to be able to see all of that, and it's building up that resource. So I've got the same thing for Lovely Evolution, and building a similar thing for some of the clients as well.
So what's great about with the free version, you've got a lot of this can be made, but that's an example of then using your using the brand that you developed before in situ, I think.
Yeah.
The brand kit, that's a paid version, isn't it?
No. So there are some features in the brand kit that you can do for free.
Okay.
So you can, at the bare minimum, you can put in up to 3 colours in the brand bit, and you can name the kind of colour palette. But you can't, there are things that you can't do in the free one, like you can't upload your own font. So if you've got a font that's not available in Canva, Canva has also limited, there's maybe say half the fonts now are not free in the free one. You can only access them and use them in the pro version. But there's still plenty of choice there. You know, I think, you know, you can do so much even with the free one. I mean, I only upgraded to pro kind of the back end of last year because I was sort of doing more and more work with sort of training on it, and I thought, well, you know, if people are going to be asking me questions about the pro one, I need to be knowing about it.
It's quite reasonable as well. Is it about £7-8 a month, I think?
Something like that. I just paid for the upfront one because it makes it, I think it was cheaper to do that, and it made sense. But it's yeah, even upgrading, you know, there's some features which are, you know, worth the upgrade, and somewhere I'm like, it's not really that necessary. You know, you can do the free trial for 30 days as well and see whether it's worthwhile. But I would say just start with the free one, and then if you kind of feel like you're getting frustrated because you want more choice or some of the options, and Canva's very good at going, would you like to upgrade, without being to the level of being annoying. You know, you can just sort of close the window and ignore it, and they've got, you know, an email newsletter with sort of things that you can do. So there's a lot of resources there that you can be made available. You know, understand that's there.
So if somebody is looking to really, I know we've done a bit of an overview of Canva here, but if someone's looking to really learn more about it, I think you provide workshops, don't you, Marie-Louise?
Yeah, so I've got a membership as well. So for those that are watching kind of soon after this being released and at the minute, I'm opening up to be free until June, and that free sign up ends 30th of April 2020. But that will be, once, you know, the freebies cut off, it will be £30 a month, and it includes weekly 30-minute calls. So it's sort of weekly training, sort of, so it's bite-sized. I am doing some online workshops. My next one is on the 6th of May 2020, and that's an introduction to Canva.
If you want to share those links with me, I'll make sure it goes out in the email to everyone who's on this
brilliant
call.
Thank you. Yeah,
nice.
That'd be lovely.
So what's next? I want to allow a little bit of time for the Q&A that's left. I think it's worth everyone knowing that these are the future subjects in the series. This is week 5 of 12 weeks that we're planning as it stands. Next week is going to be about email marketing. I'm going to have a guest, Mark Costa from Pixuma, who's a designer.
How dare you? Paul brings the hashtag BFF.
We're going to specialise in email marketing, and then we're going to also talk about PR one week. One week I'm going to have a holiday. I'm just going to have a few days off, so we're going to skip 1 week. We'll do LinkedIn optimization, launching a podcast as well, and talk about customer journeys. I think if there is any subject that you want to learn about, please do let me know. Or if you think that there's somebody else who would be great, make a great guest, please introduce me. It's every Wednesday at 11 AM for 12 weeks, and there are videos afterwards. If you want to view future dates or join the newsletter and register and do all that stuff, go to idealmarketingcompany.co.uk/crisis communications.